Welcome to this deep dive into one of the darkest and most unsettling tales in American history. Well, here it is. The story begins in the autumn of 1952 in the small mining town of Harlan County, Kentucky, where the mountains stand like ancient sentinels covered in fog and the smell of coal dust permeates every corner of daily life. Ruth Caldwell is 17 years old, the eldest daughter of a family of 6 children, living in a weather-beaten wooden house on the outskirts of town where the paint has long since peeled away and the roof leaks when the November rains come heavy and persistent. Her father works in the mines, spending 14-hour days in the darkness extracting coal from the earth's belly, returning home each evening with blackened face and hands, coughing a deep raspy cough that echoes through the thin walls of their home. Ruth's mother takes in laundry from the wealthier families in town, her hands red and cracked from the lye soap and cold water, her back permanently bent from years of scrubbing other people's clothes on a washboard in their cramped kitchen. Ruth herself works at the general store owned by the Morgan family, the wealthiest clan in Harlan County, who made their fortune not from mining but from lending money to miners and selling supplies at inflated prices. She stocks shelves, sweeps floors, and serves customers from dawn until dusk 6 days a week, earning barely enough to help her mother feed her younger siblings. The store sits on Main Street, a dirt road that turns to thick mud whenever it rains, lined with similar establishments that serve the mining community with their basic necessities. Ruth is beautiful in an understated way, with auburn hair that catches the light when she removes her work bonnet, green eyes that reflect both determination and quiet sadness, and a slender frame that belies the strength she possesses from years of physical labor. Nathaniel Morgan is 19 years old, the youngest son of Thomas Morgan, owner of the general store and holder of mortgages on half the properties in town. Nathaniel has just returned from 2 years at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, sent there by his father to learn business and accounting so he could eventually take over the family enterprises. Unlike his older brothers who embraced their father's ruthless approach to business, Nathaniel spent his time at university reading literature, philosophy, and becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the source of his family's wealth. He is tall and lean, with dark hair and thoughtful brown eyes that seem constantly troubled by some internal conflict. His hands are soft, unmarked by manual labor, and his clothes are well-tailored, setting him apart from every other young man in Harlan County. Their first meaningful encounter happens on a gray Wednesday morning in October when Ruth is arranging canned goods on the upper shelves using a wooden ladder that wobbles dangerously with each movement. Nathaniel, who has been working in the store for 3 weeks since his return, notices the ladder's instability and rushes to steady it, arriving just as Ruth loses her balance. She falls backward, and he catches her in his arms, both of them freezing in that moment of unexpected physical contact. Ruth quickly extracts herself, her face flushing with embarrassment and anger at appearing vulnerable, while Nathaniel apologizes profusely, his own cheeks reddening. The brief interaction lasts less than a minute, but something passes between them in that moment, an awareness that transcends their vast social differences. Over the following weeks, they begin exchanging brief words during work, conversations that start with practical matters about inventory and customer needs but gradually evolve into something more personal. Nathaniel asks Ruth about her family, her dreams, her thoughts on the books that line the small shelf in the back of the store that nobody ever buys. Ruth is initially guarded, suspicious of his intentions, assuming he is simply amusing himself with the poor girl who works for his family. But his questions seem genuine, his interest authentic, and slowly she allows herself to respond with more than monosyllabic answers. She tells him about her love of reading, how she borrows books from the traveling library that comes through town once a month, how she dreams of becoming a teacher someday though she knows it is impossible given her family's financial situation. Nathaniel listens with an intensity that makes her uncomfortable, as if her words matter more than they should. The Appalachian autumn brings stunning displays of color to the mountains, the maples and oaks turning brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold that seem to set the hillsides on fire in the afternoon sun. Ruth takes her lunch break sitting on the wooden steps behind the store, eating the cornbread and beans her mother packs for her each morning, watching the mountains and finding brief peace in their unchanging presence. One day Nathaniel joins her, carrying his own lunch in a proper container with real sandwiches made with store-bought bread and sliced meat. He sits several feet away, not presuming familiarity, and they eat in silence for several minutes before he begins talking about his time at university, about the books he read, the ideas he encountered, the growing awareness that the comfort of his life came at the direct expense of people like her family. Ruth listens without commenting, not certain if his guilt is genuine or performative, but finding herself drawn to his obvious discomfort with his own privilege. She tells him bluntly that guilt changes nothing, that awareness without action is worthless, that his family will continue exploiting minors regardless of his philosophical revelations. Her words are harsh, delivered without emotion, and Nathaniel accepts them without defensiveness, nodding slowly and admitting she is absolutely right. This honesty disarms Ruth more than any pretty words could have, and she finds herself softening slightly toward him, seeing him as separate from his family's legacy even though she knows such separation is ultimately impossible. As October fades into November, their lunch breaks together become routine, an unspoken arrangement that both anticipate though neither explicitly acknowledges. They talk about everything and nothing, about books and ideas, about the changing seasons and the hardness of mountain life, about dreams that seem impossible and futures that feel predetermined. Nathaniel begins lending Ruth books from his personal collection, volumes of poetry and novels that she devours in the few hours between work and sleep, reading by candlelight in the room she shares with her two younger sisters. These books open windows to worlds she never imagined, to possibilities beyond Harlan County's coal-stained boundaries, and she both treasures and resents them for showing her what she can never have. The first frost comes in mid-November, coating everything in a crystalline layer that makes the morning world look magical before the coal dust settles again. Ruth arrives at work early one Monday morning to find Nathaniel already there, sitting on the store steps with a package wrapped in brown paper. He hands it to her with obvious nervousness, explaining that he noticed her worn coat is insufficient for the coming winter and he bought her a new one from the catalog. Ruth's immediate reaction is anger, her pride wounded by what feels like charity, by the reminder of the vast gap between their circumstances. She refuses the gift, her voice sharp, telling him she does not need his pity or his money. Nathaniel tries to explain that it was not meant as charity but as genuine concern, that he cannot stand watching her shiver through the cold months ahead, but Ruth's hurt and humiliation make his words sound hollow. She brushes past him into the store, leaving the package on the steps, and spends the rest of the day avoiding him with such determination that he eventually stops trying to talk to her. The easy camaraderie that had developed between them shatters, replaced by uncomfortable silence and carefully maintained distance. Ruth tells herself she is relieved, that the friendship was inappropriate anyway, that nothing good could come from blurring the lines between their separate worlds. But over the following days, she finds herself missing their conversations, missing the way Nathaniel looked at her as if she was worth listening to, missing the brief respite their talks provided from the grinding monotony of her life. When she retrieves the package from where it still sits on the steps 3 days later, damp from rain and slightly damaged, she finds not just a coat but a beautiful warm one with real wool lining, far nicer than anything she has ever owned. Tucked inside is a note in Nathaniel's careful handwriting apologizing for overstepping, explaining that his only intention was to help someone he has come to care about deeply, someone whose strength and intelligence humble him daily. Ruth keeps the coat but does not wear it to work, not wanting to answer questions about its origin. She begins speaking to Nathaniel again, cautiously at first, and their lunch breaks resume though with a new awareness of the complications inherent in their connection. Winter arrives in earnest, bringing snow that transforms the ugly mining town into something briefly beautiful, though the cold makes life harder for families like Ruth's who can barely afford enough coal to heat their drafty homes. Christmas approaches with little joy, as it does in mining communities where money is perpetually scarce and expectations are necessarily modest. On Christmas Eve, Ruth works a half day at the store, helping with the last-minute rush of customers buying small luxuries they can barely afford. As she prepares to leave, Nathaniel stops her, asking if she would meet him the next day, Christmas afternoon, at the old church on the hill above town. Ruth knows she should refuse, knows that meeting him outside of work crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed, but she finds herself agreeing despite her better judgment. She tells her family she is visiting a friend, lying easily though the deception sits heavy in her stomach, and walks through the snowy streets to the abandoned church that has not held services since the previous minister left town 5 years ago. Nathaniel is already there, stamping his feet in the cold, his breath visible in the frozen air. Inside the church, he has set up a small space with blankets and a camping lantern, creating a pocket of warmth in the cold building. They sit together, closer than propriety allows, and Nathaniel gives Ruth a gift wrapped more carefully than the coat, a leather-bound journal with blank pages and a fountain pen. He tells her that he has noticed how she absorbs books with desperate hunger, and he imagines she has stories of her own that deserve to be written down, that her perspective and experiences are valuable and worth recording. Ruth is overwhelmed, not just by the gift itself but by the thought behind it, by the recognition that her internal life matters. For the first time, she allows herself to acknowledge what has been growing between them, the connection that transcends their different worlds. She tells Nathaniel about her dreams of teaching, about wanting to give children from families like hers access to education and opportunity, about feeling trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Nathaniel listens with complete attention, then shares his own frustrations with his family's business practices, his desire to change things, his fear that he lacks the courage to truly stand against his father. In the cold abandoned church on Christmas Day, they find in each other a rare understanding, a meeting of minds and hearts that feels both miraculous and doomed. As the winter afternoon fades to evening, they know they must leave separately to avoid suspicion, but before parting, Nathaniel takes Ruth's hand in his, a gesture simple yet profound in its intimacy. He tells her that meeting her has changed him fundamentally, that he no longer wants to live the life his father planned for him, that he wants to find a way to make his privilege mean something beyond personal comfort. Ruth wants to believe him, but her practical nature understands the enormous obstacles facing any real change. She tells him that wanting change and creating it are vastly different things, that good intentions accomplish nothing against entrenched power and economic reality. They leave the church separately, Ruth going first while Nathaniel waits 15 minutes before following, both understanding without discussion that their connection must remain secret. The town would condemn Ruth as a social climber seeking to trap a wealthy man, while Nathaniel's family would rage at his association with a poor girl so far beneath his station. The impossibility of their situation is clear to both of them, yet neither can bring themselves to end what has begun, drawn together by forces stronger than logic or self-preservation. The winter of 1953 is brutal in Harlan County, with temperatures dropping so low that the coal dust freezes in the air and breath crystallizes instantly upon leaving the mouth. Ruth's father develops a persistent cough that worsens throughout January, a deep, rattling sound that keeps the family awake at night and fills the small house with dread. The mine doctor, paid by the company and therefore loyal to their interests rather than worker health, declares it nothing serious, prescribing rest that no miner can afford to take without losing wages desperately needed to feed a family of 8. Ruth watches her father deteriorate, seeing him grow thinner and weaker, his skin taking on a grayish pallor that speaks of something fundamentally wrong inside his body. At work, Ruth and Nathaniel continue their careful dance of stolen moments and concealed affection, meeting during lunch breaks and finding excuses to work together on inventory or organizing supplies. Their conversations deepen, moving from surface topics to profound discussions about justice, inequality, family obligation, and personal desire. Nathaniel confesses that his father is grooming him to take over the family business, which increasingly involves not just the store but money-lending operations that keep mining families in perpetual debt. Thomas Morgan offers loans at predatory rates to miners who need money for medical expenses, funerals, or basic survival during strikes or layoffs, then forecloses on their homes and possessions when they inevitably cannot repay under the harsh terms. Ruth listens to these revelations with mixed emotions, part of her sympathizing with Nathaniel's moral disgust while another part resenting that he benefits from this exploitation regardless of his personal feelings about it. She challenges him repeatedly, asking what he plans to do with his knowledge and privilege, whether his conscience-easing talks with her constitute meaningful resistance or merely make him feel better about his complicity. These confrontations are painful but necessary, preventing their relationship from existing in fantasy while forcing both to grapple with harsh realities that cannot be wished away. In February, Ruth's father collapses at the mine entrance, coughing blood onto the frozen ground before losing consciousness. The company sends him home without pay rather than admitting the collapse happened on their property, thereby avoiding any responsibility for his injury or treatment. Ruth's mother is frantic, knowing they cannot afford a real doctor beyond the company physician who has already demonstrated his uselessness. The family faces an impossible choice between seeking proper medical care they cannot afford or watching their patriarch possibly die from neglect. Ruth's younger siblings are crying, confused and frightened, while her mother sits in numb silence, the weight of their situation crushing her already exhausted spirit. Nathaniel learns of the situation when Ruth arrives at work red-eyed from crying, having slept not at all the previous night. Without thinking of consequences, he takes money from the store register, more than enough to pay for a real doctor and medicine, and insists Ruth accept it. She refuses initially, her pride warring with desperation, but Nathaniel presses the bills into her hand, telling her that this is not charity but justice, a tiny redistribution of the wealth his family has extracted from minors like her father. Ruth takes the money with shaking hands, hating herself for accepting but unable to let pride endanger her father's life, and leaves work early to fetch the doctor from the next town over. The doctor who examines Ruth's father delivers a diagnosis that everyone feared but nobody wanted confirmed: black lung disease, the result of years inhaling coal dust deep in the mines. A progressive condition with no cure that would continue destroying his lungs until breathing became impossible. The doctor prescribes medicine to ease symptoms and advises that Ruth's father stop working in the mines immediately, advice that might as well suggest he sprout wings and fly given their economic reality. Mining is the only employment available in Harlan County for men without education or specialized skills, and no miner can afford to stop working while still capable of entering the shaft. Ruth returns to work the next day with the knowledge that her father is dying slowly, that her family's already precarious financial situation will soon become catastrophic, that her dreams of ever escaping this life have evaporated completely. Nathaniel finds her during lunch break sitting behind the store with tears streaming silently down her face, her usual composure shattered by accumulated grief and fear. He sits beside her without speaking, eventually putting his arm around her shoulders in a gesture of comfort that crosses into territory they have both been carefully avoiding. Ruth leans into him, allowing herself this moment of weakness, this brief respite from the requirement to be strong for her family. They stay that way for an hour, Ruth crying out weeks of suppressed emotion while Nathaniel holds her, both knowing they are crossing invisible lines that cannot be uncrossed. When Ruth finally composes herself, she thanks Nathaniel with genuine gratitude, telling him that his kindness has saved her father's life, at least temporarily, by allowing them access to medicine and treatment. She also tells him that they should stop seeing each other, even in their limited capacity, because she is now indebted to his family in a way that makes their relationship even more complicated and inappropriate. Nathaniel protests, arguing that his help had nothing to do with their personal connection, that he would have helped any employee's family in similar circumstances. Ruth smiles sadly at his naivety, explaining that his father will eventually notice the missing money, that there will be consequences, that she cannot allow Nathaniel to further damage his relationship with his family for her sake. She tells him that their worlds were never meant to intersect, that the brief friendship they shared was beautiful but ultimately impossible, that continuing down this path will hurt them both and solve nothing. Nathaniel responds with frustrated passion, declaring that he loves her, that the differences between them are artificial constructs maintained by people who benefit from inequality, that he wants to find a way for them to be together regardless of social expectations. Ruth is stunned by this confession, having known on some level that their feelings had progressed beyond friendship but not expecting such direct declaration. She admits that she has feelings for him as well, that their time together has been the brightest part of her difficult life, but insists this makes ending things even more critical. She explains that love without practical possibility is torture, that allowing themselves to hope for something impossible will only increase their eventual suffering. She stands, straightening her work dress, and tells Nathaniel that they must maintain strict professionalism from this point forward, no more shared lunches or private conversations, no more blurring of boundaries between employer and employee. For several weeks, Ruth enforces this separation with iron discipline, arriving at work exactly on time, performing her duties efficiently, and leaving immediately when her shift ends. She avoids eye contact with Nathaniel, deflects any attempts at conversation beyond the strictly necessary, and spends her lunch breaks alone walking through town regardless of weather. Nathaniel respects her boundaries while clearly suffering from the imposed distance, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by quiet sadness that his family notices and comments upon. Thomas Morgan asks his son repeatedly if something is troubling him, if the girl from the store has caused problems that need addressing, questions that make Nathaniel defensive and more determined to protect Ruth from his father's attention. Spring arrives late in the mountains, with snow lingering into April and the ground remaining frozen until May. Ruth's father continues working despite his diagnosis, having no other options, though his shifts are shorter and his productivity declining. The family survives on combined income from Ruth's job, her mother's laundry work, and her father's reduced wages, but there is never enough, never any margin for unexpected expenses or small luxuries. Ruth's younger siblings wear clothes that are more patch than original fabric, eat meals that consist mainly of beans and cornbread, and miss school frequently to help with household chores or, in the case of her 13-year-old brother, to work odd jobs around town. One evening in late May, Ruth is walking home from work as the sun sets behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold that briefly make even Harlan County beautiful. Nathaniel catches up with her on the dirt road, having left work early specifically to intercept her before she reaches home. He tells her that he cannot continue living this way, pretending she does not exist, acting as though the connection between them can be severed by simple avoidance. Ruth tries to walk past him, maintaining the distance she has carefully constructed, but Nathaniel blocks her path, his desperation overcoming his usual respect for her wishes. He tells her that he has been thinking constantly since their last real conversation, trying to find a solution to their seemingly impossible situation. He proposes that they leave Harlan County together, go somewhere neither is known, where their different backgrounds will not matter, where they can build a life based on their own choices rather than accidents of birth. Ruth listens with growing incredulity, initially thinking he is joking before realizing he is entirely serious. She asks him if he understands what he is suggesting, whether he has considered the practical realities of such a plan, how they would survive without his family's money or connections. Nathaniel admits he has not worked out all the details but insists that difficulties can be overcome if they face them together, that his education and her intelligence combined could create opportunities anywhere. Ruth's response is sharp and pragmatic, pointing out that she cannot abandon her family who depends on her income, that her father's illness means they need her more than ever, that running away would be selfish beyond forgiveness. She also tells Nathaniel that he is romanticizing what would actually be an incredibly difficult life, that leaving his family means giving up all financial security, that love alone cannot pay rent or put food on a table. Nathaniel argues that her family's dependence is a trap that will never release her, that if she waits for the right time to pursue her own happiness it will never come, that she deserves a life beyond endless sacrifice for circumstances she did not create. Ruth feels anger rising at his privilege showing through, his inability to understand that duty to family is not optional for people in her position, that survival requires collective effort and individual desires must sometimes be permanently subordinated. She tells him coldly that this is precisely why their relationship is impossible, because he fundamentally cannot comprehend the realities governing her life, cannot understand that some cages have no keys. They part angrily, Nathaniel frustrated by what he sees as Ruth's refusal to fight for their happiness. Ruth bitter about Nathaniel's inability to recognize his suggestions as fantasy divorced from practical reality. The confrontation reopens wounds they both had been trying to let heal, making their enforced daily proximity at work even more painful. Thomas Morgan senses tension between them and takes Ruth aside one day, warning her obliquely that his son has responsibilities and expectations that do not include involvement with girls from mining families. The threat is subtle but unmistakable, making clear that Ruth's employment depends on her maintaining appropriate distance from Nathaniel. Summer brings oppressive heat to the mountains, turning the mining town into a sweltering prison where coal dust sticks to sweating skin and every breath feels like inhaling fire. Ruth's father's condition worsens dramatically in the heat, his damaged lungs struggling with the heavy air, his coughing fits becoming more frequent and violent. The medicine the doctor prescribed runs out and cannot be refilled without money the family does not have, forcing them to watch helplessly as he suffers through episodes that leave him gasping for air and coughing blood. Ruth requests advance payment from Thomas Morgan to buy more medicine, willing to indenture herself further to the family that already controls so much of her life. Thomas refuses the advance but offers a different arrangement. If Ruth agrees to stop whatever inappropriate association his son has developed with her, he will personally pay for her father's medicine indefinitely. The offer is simultaneously generous and cruel, providing desperately needed help while explicitly acknowledging and condemning her connection with Nathaniel. Ruth understands she is being manipulated, that Thomas is using her father's illness as leverage to separate her from his son, but she also knows she has no real choice. Her father's suffering is immediate and unbearable, while her feelings for Nathaniel, however genuine, cannot be prioritized above a parent's life. She accepts Thomas's terms, promising to maintain strictly professional conduct with Nathaniel, to discourage any personal interaction, to make clear that nothing beyond employer-employee relationship exists between them. Thomas provides money for medicine immediately, along with a small increase in Ruth's wages, gestures that feel like blood money but which she cannot refuse given her family's desperate circumstances. Ruth fills the prescription, brings the medicine home to her mother, and lies about where the money came from, saying she received an unexpected raise based on her good work. That night, listening to her father breathe slightly easier thanks to the medicine, Ruth allows herself to cry for the future she has just sold for his present comfort. The summer of 1953 stretches endlessly, each day identical to the last in its grinding monotony and oppressive heat. Ruth maintains the agreement she made with Thomas Morgan, treating Nathaniel with cold professionalism that hurts them both but which she enforces mercilessly. Nathaniel eventually stops trying to engage her in conversation beyond work necessity, his confusion and hurt evident in his eyes whenever they accidentally make contact. Ruth hardens herself against the pain she causes him and herself, reminding herself constantly that her father's life depends on her compliance, that some sacrifices are necessary even when they feel unbearable. In August, unexpected news arrives that disrupts the grim status quo. Nathaniel's father has arranged an engagement between his son and Sarah Whitfield, daughter of a wealthy coal mine owner from Virginia, a match designed to merge two fortunes and extend the Morgan family's influence across a broader region. The announcement is made at a Sunday dinner to which the town's prominent families are invited, a public declaration that eliminates any possibility of Nathaniel refusing without creating enormous scandal. Ruth hears about the engagement from other store employees, gossip that spreads through town within hours, and she receives the news with a numbness that surprises her, as though she has finally exceeded her capacity for emotional pain. Nathaniel appears at work the Monday following the announcement looking haggard and desperate, his usual composure completely shattered. He seeks out Ruth during her lunch break despite her clear attempts to avoid him, cornering her in the storage room where she is pretending to organize supplies. He tries to explain that he had no knowledge of his father's plans, that the engagement was announced publicly before he was privately consulted, that he has no intention of going through with the marriage regardless of family pressure. Ruth listens without expression, then tells him quietly that what he does with his personal life is not her concern, that their professional relationship will continue unchanged, that she wishes him happiness in his future. Her words are deliberately bland and distant, designed to communicate complete indifference, but Nathaniel sees through the performance to the hurt beneath. He reaches for her hand, a gesture she permits briefly before pulling away, and tells her that he loves her, that the engagement means nothing, that he will find a way to break it off and deal with the consequences. Ruth responds that love is insufficient against the forces arrayed against them, that his family will never accept her, that even if he defied them they would spend their lives as pariahs isolated from both their communities. She tells him that she is releasing him from whatever he feels they have between them, that he should marry Sarah Whitfield and build the life his family intends, that she will survive as she always has. Nathaniel reacts with desperate anger, accusing Ruth of giving up too easily, of using practical obstacles as excuses to avoid fighting for what they both want. Ruth's own anger finally breaks through her controlled exterior, and she tells him in fierce whispers about the deal she made with his father, about trading away any possibility of them being together in exchange for medicine keeping her father alive, about how his privilege blinds him to the impossible choices poverty forces upon people. She tells him that she did not give up, that the decision was taken from her, that she made the only choice available when survival was weighted against desire. The revelation stuns Nathaniel into silence, his face cycling through shock, guilt, and rage as he processes what his father did. He promises to confront Thomas immediately, to refuse the medicine money if that is the price of Ruth's freedom, to find another way to help her family without such cruel strings attached. Ruth grabs his arm urgently, begging him not to do anything that would alert his father to their conversation, explaining that Thomas will simply fire her if he believes she is still influencing his son, that her family cannot afford the loss of her income in addition to her father's declining wages. She makes Nathaniel swear to act as though nothing has changed, to proceed with the engagement as planned, to preserve the fragile stability her sacrifice purchased. Nathaniel reluctantly agrees, seeing no immediate alternative that would not make things worse, but he tells Ruth that this is not finished, that he will find a way to free them both from these circumstances. Ruth nods without believing him, having learned that hope is a luxury she cannot afford, that survival requires accepting reality rather than fighting for impossible changes. They separate as they have become accustomed to doing, maintaining careful distance, acting out roles that bear no resemblance to their actual feelings, slowly suffocating under the weight of everything unsaid and undone. The engagement period brings Sarah Whitfield to Harlan County repeatedly, a beautiful blonde woman with impeccable manners and expensive clothes who treats everyone outside her social class with pleasant condescension. Ruth serves her in the store multiple times, enduring Sarah's unconscious rudeness and watching Nathaniel play the role of attentive fiancé with a skill that suggests either good acting or genuine affection. Ruth cannot tell which possibility hurts more, torture coming equally from thoughts of Nathaniel's suffering or from imagination of him finding happiness with his intended bride. She maintains her composure through these encounters, her face revealing nothing, her service professionally perfect. Fall arrives with its usual display of color transforming the mountains into patchwork quilts of red, gold, and orange, nature's beauty contrasting sharply with the ugliness of human arrangements. Ruth's father takes a turn for the worse in October, his condition deteriorating despite the medicine, his body finally surrendering to years of damage that no treatment can reverse. He spends more time in bed than working, his wages effectively ended though the family cannot yet afford to acknowledge this reality. Ruth picks up extra hours at the store, working open to close 6 days a week, pushing her body beyond exhaustion to compensate for lost income. Thomas Morgan allows the increased hours without comment, his only acknowledgement of Ruth's family situation, perhaps feeling minimal guilt about his role in their continued suffering. Ruth exists in a state of numb exhaustion, sleeping 3 or 4 hours per night, eating barely enough to maintain function, her youth and strength stretched to breaking point. Nathaniel watches her decline with obvious anguish but respects her request not to intervene, a restraint that costs him visibly. His own health deteriorates somewhat, dark circles appearing under his eyes, his usual energy depleted by the stress of living a life he does not want while watching the woman he loves destroy herself through work and grief. In November, Ruth's father dies on a Wednesday morning, his lungs finally giving out completely, drowning in fluid his body could no longer expel. Ruth is at work when it happens, her mother sending Ruth's 13-year-old brother to deliver the news, the boy arriving red-faced and crying to tell his sister their father is gone. Ruth receives the information without visible reaction, thanking her brother calmly, telling him to go home and comfort their mother, that she will come after work ends. The boy stares at her in confusion, not understanding why she is not leaving immediately, but Ruth explains they cannot afford for her to miss work, that the family needs her wages now more than ever. She finishes her shift mechanically, stocking shelves and serving customers while feeling completely hollowed out, operating on autopilot while her mind circles the fact of her father's death. Nathaniel learns what happened from her brother's tearful announcement, and he approaches Ruth multiple times during the afternoon, offering condolences and insisting she should leave, that family emergency justifies absence. Ruth refuses each time with polite firmness, explaining that emotion does not pay bills, that her father's death creates immediate financial crisis requiring her continued employment. Her pragmatism in the face of profound loss disturbs Nathaniel deeply, revealing the extent to which poverty has forced her to suppress natural grief in service of survival. When Ruth finally arrives home after her shift ends, she finds her family in various states of shock and mourning, her mother sitting silently beside the bed where her father's body still lies, her younger siblings crying and confused, the house filled with that particular emptiness that death creates. Ruth takes charge immediately, organizing the necessary arrangements, contacting the funeral home despite knowing they cannot afford proper service, preparing her siblings for the reality of a pauper's burial. She does not cry, does not pause in her efficient management of crisis, does not allow herself to feel anything beyond the immediate need to ensure her family's continued survival. The funeral is held 3 days later, a brief grim service at the cemetery where miners are buried in plots maintained by the Union. Most of Harlan County's mining families attend, understanding that they are all living on borrowed time, that what happened to Ruth's father awaits most of them eventually. Nathaniel comes despite knowing his presence is inappropriate, standing in the back with other townspeople who are not close to the family but who observe the ritual out of community obligation. He watches Ruth stand straight and dry-eyed beside her weeping mother, her face like carved stone, and he understands that something inside her has broken beyond his ability to reach or repair. After the burial, Ruth returns to work the next day, walking through the door exactly on time, resuming her duties as though nothing has changed. Thomas Morgan calls her into the office, offering formal condolences and informing her that the medicine arrangement obviously no longer applies, that her father's death releases both parties from their agreement. He suggests that with the loss of her father's income, her family might consider moving to cheaper accommodations, that he knows of opportunities in other towns where the cost of living is lower. Ruth understands immediately that this is a suggestion to leave Harlan County, to remove herself from proximity to Nathaniel, a continuation of Thomas's campaign to separate them. Ruth tells him that her family cannot afford to relocate, that moving requires money they do not have, that she needs to continue her employment to keep them housed and fed. Thomas considers this, then makes a new offer. He will provide money for her family to relocate to her mother's relatives in Tennessee, enough to cover moving expenses and first month's rent, on the condition that Ruth goes with them and does not return to Harlan County. The offer is another bribe disguised as generosity, attempting to purchase her removal through financial coercion. Ruth asks for time to consider, knowing her family desperately needs the money but unwilling to make such a decision hastily. She discusses the offer with her mother that evening, presenting it as an opportunity from Ruth's employer rather than revealing Thomas's true motivation. Her mother is initially reluctant to leave Harlan County despite its hardships, having spent her entire life in these mountains, but Ruth persuades her by emphasizing better opportunities for the younger children in Tennessee, lower cost of living, fresh start away from painful memories. Her mother eventually agrees, trusting Ruth's judgment, not understanding that her daughter is sacrificing herself yet again for family survival. Ruth returns to Thomas the next day and accepts his offer, agreeing to leave Harlan County within 2 weeks, effectively ending any possibility of a future with Nathaniel. Nathaniel only learns of Ruth's impending departure 3 days before she is scheduled to leave, overhearing his father mention it casually to his mother at dinner. He confronts Ruth at work the next day, finding her alone in the storage room, demanding to know why she did not tell him she was leaving. Ruth explains calmly that her family needs the relocation money, that Tennessee offers better opportunities than remaining in Harlan County, that her decision has nothing to do with him. Nathaniel sees through the lies immediately, recognizing his father's manipulation, and he rails against Ruth for allowing herself to be bought and removed like an inconvenient obstacle. Ruth's carefully maintained composure finally cracks, and she tells Nathaniel with passionate intensity that everything she has done has been about survival, that he has no right to judge choices made under duress he cannot imagine, that she is tired of being caught between his desire for her and his father's money. She tells him that she loves him, has always loved him, but that love cannot feed her siblings or house her family, that some people do not get to prioritize personal happiness over collective survival. She tells him that the kindest thing he can do is let her go cleanly, marry Sarah Whitfield, live the comfortable life he was born to, and forget the poor girl who briefly distracted him from his proper path. Nathaniel refuses to accept this ending, insisting there must be another way, that he will find resources to support her family without his father's cruel conditions. Ruth tells him that any money from him carries the same complications, that she cannot build a life funded by his charity or by defying his family, that their different worlds have gravity that pulls them apart no matter how hard they struggle toward each other. She tells him that she is choosing her family over her heart, that if he truly loves her he will respect this decision rather than make it harder. She asks him to let her leave with whatever dignity she can maintain, to not reduce her sacrifice to melodrama by clinging to impossible dreams. The day before Ruth's departure, Nathaniel does not come to work, sending a message that he is ill, though everyone understands he simply cannot bear to see Ruth for the last time. Ruth is relieved by his absence, knowing she does not have strength for another emotional confrontation, that she needs to focus on the logistics of moving her family and leaving behind the only home she has known. She works her final shift with the same efficiency that has characterized all her employment, cleaning and organizing as though she will return tomorrow, maintaining professional demeanor until the last customer leaves and the store closes. Thomas Morgan hands her final wages plus the promised relocation money in an envelope, along with what he describes as bonus pay for years of faithful service. The amount is generous enough to make clear he is buying her permanent absence, that he considers her removal well worth the investment. Ruth takes the money without comment, understanding that fighting or refusing would accomplish nothing, that pragmatism requires accepting victory even when it feels like defeat. She thanks him formally for the employment opportunity, gathers her few personal items, and walks out of the store for the last time, her back straight and her expression neutral despite the grief and rage churning beneath her controlled surface. That evening, Nathaniel appears at Ruth's house, the first and only time he has visited her home, his presence shocking in its impropriety. He comes to the door carrying a package, asking to speak with Ruth, his desperation overriding all concern for social convention. Ruth steps outside to avoid bringing him into the house where neighbors might see, and they stand in the cold November darkness, breath visible in the freezing air. Nathaniel hands her the package, which contains books, the volumes she borrowed and read over their months of friendship, along with new ones he bought specifically for her continued education. He also gives her an envelope containing all the money he had in his personal account, his entire savings from years of allowances and gifts, telling her that she should use it to pursue teaching credentials in Tennessee, to build the life she always dreamed of rather than simply surviving in poverty. Ruth tries to refuse, insisting she cannot take his money, that doing so would make her permanently indebted, but Nathaniel begs her to accept, telling her that this is not charity but investment in someone whose potential has been crushed by circumstance that is fundamentally unjust. He tells her that if he cannot be with her, at least he can help her escape the trap that has held her captive since birth. Ruth accepts the money with shaking hands, understanding that this is goodbye, that Nathaniel is giving her both financial support and emotional release, freeing them both from the impossible weight of loving someone they cannot have. They stand together in the darkness for a long moment, not touching but acutely aware of each other's presence, memorizing this final encounter to sustain them through years of separation. Nathaniel tells her that he will never forget her, that she has fundamentally changed who he is, that he hopes she finds happiness in Tennessee. Ruth tells him that loving him was both the best and worst thing that ever happened to her, that she will carry him in her heart even as she builds a life that does not include him. They do not kiss, do not embrace, maintaining the boundaries that have defined their relationship from the beginning. Nathaniel turns and walks away into the darkness, his shoulders hunched against cold and grief, while Ruth watches until he disappears from view. She stands alone in the frozen night for a long time, holding the books and money he gave her, feeling the full weight of everything she is losing and everything she might gain. When she finally goes inside, her face is wet with tears she did not feel falling, the first she has cried since her father died, grief finally finding release in the privacy of darkness. The next morning, Ruth and her family load their possessions into a borrowed truck, fitting an entire life into a space barely larger than a closet. Ruth takes a last look at Harlan County, at the mountains that have defined her existence, at the coal-stained town that has held both her suffering and her brief happiness. She does not look toward the store where Nathaniel presumably is, does not allow herself any gesture of farewell beyond this general acknowledgement of departure. The truck pulls away, carrying the Caldwell family toward Tennessee and an uncertain future, leaving behind poverty and possibility in equal measure. The winter of 1971 finds Ruth Caldwell teaching 4th grade at a small elementary school in Knoxville, Tennessee, living a life that would have seemed impossible to her 17-year-old self arriving from Harlan County 18 years earlier. She used Nathaniel's money to complete teaching certificate training, supplementing it with scholarships and part-time work, her intelligence and determination finally finding proper outlet. She secured her first teaching position in 1956 and has since earned respect in her profession, known for particular dedication to students from poor families, understanding their struggles intimately. Ruth is 35 years old, unmarried despite numerous opportunities, her auburn hair now containing threads of gray, her green eyes still holding that mixture of sadness and strength that has characterized her since youth. She lives simply in a modest apartment near the school, directing most of her income toward helping her mother and younger siblings who still struggle financially despite improved circumstances. Her mother remarried several years after arriving in Tennessee, to a kind man who works in a factory and treats her children decently, providing stability if not prosperity. Ruth's siblings have scattered to various jobs and marriages, building lives that, while not easy, exceed what would have been possible had they remained in Harlan County. Ruth rarely speaks of her time in Kentucky, deflecting questions about her past with vague answers that discourage further inquiry. She has not returned to Harlan County in 18 years, has not allowed herself to wonder what became of Nathaniel Morgan or whether his marriage to Sarah Whitfield proceeded as planned. She built a wall around that part of her life, sealing away memories that would undermine her carefully constructed equilibrium if examined too closely. Her students know her as kind but strict, caring but unsentimental, a teacher who demands excellence while providing support for those struggling to meet her expectations. One February afternoon, Ruth is grading papers after school when the principal enters her classroom, bringing a message that someone is waiting to see her in the office. Ruth is puzzled, not expecting any visitors, but she follows the principal downstairs and into the administrative area. The person waiting is immediately familiar despite 18 years of changes. Nathaniel Morgan, now 37 years old, his dark hair receding slightly, his lean frame filled out somewhat, his face showing the marks of time and experience. Ruth stops in the doorway, her heart suddenly pounding, every carefully maintained wall threatening to collapse at the sight of him. They stare at each other for a long moment before Nathaniel speaks, his voice rougher than she remembers but still fundamentally his. He apologizes for appearing without warning, explaining that he has been searching for her for several months, finally tracking her through teaching registries and school system records. He asks if they can talk somewhere private, and Ruth, operating on autopilot while her mind spins, agrees. They leave the school and walk to a diner 2 blocks away, sitting in a back booth where their conversation will not be overheard, both struggling to bridge 18 years of silence. Nathaniel tells his story first, the narrative spilling out as though he has been waiting years to share it. He married Sarah Whitfield in 1954 as planned, a wedding attended by everyone important in Kentucky coal country, a union that merged family fortunes and satisfied parental ambitions. The marriage was civil but loveless, both parties understanding they were fulfilling duty rather than pursuing happiness. Sarah was kind in her way, not cruel, simply existing in a different emotional universe than Nathaniel, content with social obligations and family expectations that left him feeling increasingly hollow. They had 2 children, both daughters, and Nathaniel threw himself into fatherhood with desperate energy, finding in his children the emotional connection missing from his marriage. He worked for his father as expected, managing the family businesses, eventually taking over completely when Thomas Morgan suffered a stroke in 1965. As owner, Nathaniel began changing the predatory practices that had built family wealth, lowering interest rates on loans, forgiving debts for families in genuine crisis, selling properties back to mining families at fair prices. His father, diminished by illness, was powerless to stop these changes, while his mother and brothers condemned him as weak and foolishly sentimental. Nathaniel's marriage dissolved slowly, he and Sarah maintaining appearances while living essentially separate lives. united only by their children and social expectation. Sarah eventually began a discreet affair with a doctor in Lexington, while Nathaniel threw himself further into reforming his family's business practices, trying to alleviate the guilt of inherited wealth through belated justice. He tells Ruth that not a day passed without thinking of her, wondering what she was doing, hoping she had found the life she deserved. When his youngest daughter left for college last fall, he finally allowed himself to act on the desire to find Ruth that had been growing for 18 years. Ruth listens to this confession with turbulent emotions, simultaneously moved by his continued feelings and angry at his timing, at the assumption he could simply re-enter her life after nearly 2 decades. She tells him her own story more briefly: the struggle to complete teacher training while helping support her family, the years building her career, the deliberate choice to remain unmarried rather than settle for something less than what she had felt for him. She tells him that she has built a good life, not the one she might have chosen but one that provides satisfaction and purpose, that she has made peace with her past and learned to live without hope for futures that cannot be. Nathaniel reaches across the table, taking her hand in his, a gesture that feels simultaneously foreign and achingly familiar. He tells her that his wife died 6 months ago, a sudden illness that took her quickly, that he is now free from the constraints that kept them apart for 18 years. He asks if there might still be a possibility for them, whether time and circumstance have destroyed what they once felt or if some foundation remains upon which they could build something new. Ruth pulls her hand back, overwhelmed by the intensity of this sudden reunion, needing space to process emotions she has kept buried for nearly 2 decades. She tells Nathaniel that she needs time to think, that he cannot appear after 18 years and expect her to simply embrace a possibility she has spent half her life accepting as lost. She also expresses anger at his timing, asking why he never wrote during his marriage, never gave her any indication he was still thinking of her, left her to assume he had forgotten their connection in favor of his comfortable life. Nathaniel admits he believed contact would be cruel while he was married, that reaching out would have hurt them both without offering any real possibility of being together, that he thought complete separation was kinder than maintaining painful connection across an unbridgeable gap. Ruth acknowledges the logic of his reasoning while resenting its presumption, his choice to decide for both of them what would be bearable, his assumption that she preferred complete silence to any acknowledgement of their continued existence. They argue with the passion of people who have stored up 18 years of unspoken grievances, their raised voices drawing attention from other diner patrons until they both remember where they are and force themselves to lower their volume. The confrontation exhausts them both, revealing how much unresolved emotion remains beneath their calm adult surfaces, how inadequately time has healed wounds carved so deeply in youth. They part with tentative agreement to meet again the following weekend, Nathaniel staying in a hotel in Knoxville while Ruth considers whether she wants to pursue this unexpected resurrection of their past. Ruth spends the intervening days in turmoil, her carefully ordered life disrupted by feelings she believed permanently buried. She discusses the situation with her mother, now 63 and softened by remarriage, who remembers Nathaniel as the young man whose generosity helped them escape Harlan County. Her mother encourages Ruth to explore this possibility, pointing out that second chances are rare and precious, that spending her life alone because of pride or fear would be a waste of the happiness she deserves. When they meet again, Ruth and Nathaniel talk for hours, beginning to bridge the 18-year gap with stories of their separate lives, finding that the fundamental connection between them has survived despite time and circumstance. Ruth introduces Nathaniel to her students, watching him interact with the children with gentle patience that reveals his years of fatherhood. Nathaniel invites Ruth to meet his daughters when they visit for spring break, nervous about her reaction to these tangible reminders of his years with another woman. Ruth agrees, understanding that any future they might build must incorporate rather than ignore the lives they have lived apart. Over the following months, Ruth and Nathaniel navigate the complex process of reconnecting after 18 years of separation, learning who they have become while recognizing traces of their younger selves. It is not easy or simple, both carrying scars from years of resignation and adaptation, both having built lives that must now be reorganized to accommodate unexpected possibility. Ruth struggles with resentment over lost years, with anger at circumstances that kept them apart, with fear that time has changed them too much for real reunion. Nathaniel battles guilt over his relative privilege during their separation, over his inability to have fought harder for them in youth, over the timing that kept him from returning until his wife's death freed him. They are honest about these difficulties, refusing to pretend that time and separation have not left marks, working through accumulated hurt and disappointment with patience learned from years of life experience. Gradually, they find their way back to something that resembles their original connection, deepened by time and suffering, more realistic but no less genuine. Ruth accepts that she loves him still, has never stopped loving him despite all efforts to move forward, that the possibility of building a life together is worth risking her established equilibrium. Nathaniel proves through consistent presence that he is committed to her finally having priority in his life, that he is willing to relocate from Kentucky to Tennessee, to adapt to her world rather than demanding she conform to his. In June, 18 months after their reunion, Nathaniel and Ruth marry in a small ceremony attended by Ruth's family and Nathaniel's daughters, a middle-aged couple claiming the happiness that eluded them in youth. It is not the romantic fairy tale either might have imagined at 17 and 19, but rather a mature union between people who understand suffering and value peace, who have learned that love alone is insufficient without commitment and practical partnership. They settle in Knoxville, Nathaniel using his business experience to work with nonprofit organizations focused on Appalachian poverty, Ruth continuing her teaching career, both finding purpose in work that addresses inequalities they know intimately. The following spring, Ruth returns to Harlan County for the first time in 19 years, accompanying Nathaniel, who needs to settle final business matters related to his family's holdings. The town has declined further in their absence, the mines closing one by one as coal becomes less economically viable, the population shrinking as residents flee to find work elsewhere. They visit Ruth's old house, now abandoned and falling apart, the poverty she escaped still crushing those who remain. They visit the cemetery where Ruth's father is buried, Nathaniel meeting for the first time the man whose death indirectly shaped both their lives, whose illness forced choices that separated them for 18 years, standing among the graves of miners who sacrificed their bodies to fuel industry that cared nothing for their welfare. Ruth and Nathaniel acknowledge the cruelty of systems that destroyed so many lives in service of profit. They talk about the 18 years they lost, about whether different choices might have brought them together sooner, about whether their separation was inevitable or if greater courage in youth might have changed their trajectory. These are questions without satisfying answers, speculation about roads not taken that cannot alter what actually happened, but asking them provides some closure to grief they both still carry over lost time. Ruth tells Nathaniel that she has forgiven him for choosing duty over desire in their youth, understanding now that he was as trapped by his circumstances as she was by hers, that neither was truly free to defy the forces governing their lives. She also tells him that she has forgiven herself for accepting his father's money and leaving Harlan County, recognizing that survival sometimes requires compromises that feel like betrayals. Nathaniel tells Ruth that he has spent 18 years trying to be worthy of her sacrifice, trying to use his privilege in ways that would honor rather than insult the struggles of people like her family, that she has been his moral compass even in absence. They leave Harlan County together as the sun sets behind the mountains, the same mountains that witnessed their young love and forced separation, carrying with them both painful memories and hard-won happiness. Their story is too cruel for history books to record, a footnote about class divisions and missed opportunities rather than epic tragedy, but it is theirs nonetheless, a testament to love that survived despite circumstances designed to destroy it. They have lost 18 years but found each other finally, claiming whatever time remains with the fierce appreciation of people who understand exactly how much happiness costs. Ruth and Nathaniel spend their remaining years working to dismantle the systems that once separated them, using combined resources and experience to create opportunities for children from families like Ruth's, to challenge industries that profit from worker exploitation, to remember those like Ruth's father whose lives were consumed by coal dust and impossible choices. It is not redemption for lost time, nothing can restore those 18 years, but it is meaning pulled from suffering, purpose built on remembering rather than forgetting. They grow old together slowly, their love deepened by shared commitment to justice, by refusal to accept that their painful past was inevitable or natural. When Ruth dies at 78, 43 years after their reunion, Nathaniel sits beside her bed in the same position he occupied beside his father decades earlier, holding her hand as she slips away. Her last words to him are gratitude for their time together, acknowledgement that despite everything, despite the cruelty and separation and lost years, she would choose loving him again if given the opportunity. Nathaniel survives her by 3 years, dying at 84 with her name on his lips, their story ending as most stories do, in death that erases individual pain while leaving behind example and memory. The Appalachian Mountains remain unchanged by human drama, standing as they always have, indifferent to the loves and losses of people born and buried in their shadows. Ruth and Nathaniel's story fades from living memory within a generation, known only to their children and grandchildren who inherit responsibility for carrying forward the lessons learned through their grandparents' suffering and eventual triumph. It is a story too cruel for history books, too quiet for legend, too specific for universal recognition, but no less real for its obscurity, no less valuable for its lack of fame, one of countless tales of love tested by circumstance and emerging scarred but intact. To uncover more stories that reveal the hidden secrets and forgotten mysteries of the past, leave a like if this deep investigation kept you hooked until the end. I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Did you know that 80% of people who watch aren't subscribed and end up missing incredible stories? It costs nothing. Oh, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and share other dark tales that, in your opinion, deserve to be explored here on the channel. See you soon.